Fine, I will do a delve list. Welcome back, you filthy exiles, and yes, I decided with all the feedback off of yesterday's videos and always every league that we would do a list of builds that you could play for Delve in particular at League Start. Now, the big thing about Delve, and let's talk about some of the questions that came up that I read through just around like defensive layers that you need to have. And I wrote notes for this and I'll put this in the description below. So, a couple of things. First of all, depth 500 to 700. Approximately the EHP that you need to have is between 150 to 200 to feel comfortable. You can have a life pool of about 4,000 on jugs, but you need a fair bit of armor to stack on top. The biggest things that hit you for 10 in, and for 10 that's a saying in Australian, for damage in Delve are things like physical damage, because you have to take so much of it. Recoup and regeneration is pretty important. So that's why things like Defiance of Destiny are very strong. Endurance charge stacking, very, very strong. Some other things to also bear in mind: max cap and overcapping resistances is incredibly important in Delve. You pretty much need to do that before you go into Delve. Chaos damage has a place in Delve, but there is far more elemental damage that's going to hit you and pen on you than anything else. If, for example, the biggest damage modifier in Delve that annoys me the most is elemental penetration. The other thing, so you can have ES or life-based. You just need to have, like characters, you just need to have enough recoup to handle the damage coming. Preferably things like glancing blows in particular with Chaos Inoculation and Aegis Aurora configurations work exceptionally well with ES characters, but they do hit a certain peak, though there are some builds that can go in a deep delve, but you need to get to Mage Blood territory. Generally builds that are like armor stacking, strength stackers, ES mana stackers in particular do probably the best in Delve, less Molten Striker Zenith, which is a strength stacker. These are the builds that are going to go deep, right? And it's a very particular build that does make it that deep. Now, you can go deep with other different types of builds, but it does just require more investment. I've always considered to go 1,000 plus unless you're doing like insane levels of endurance charge stacking with the brutal, I think it's the brutal restraint belt that drops off Maven. Basically, I'm hoping that's it. It may not be that, and correct me in the comments below. But basically, you really do need a Mage Blood to go past 1,000 depth delve. Can get there with a little bit of a struggle without it, but once you get to that point, you do need that ease of access for resistances, overcap reses, and things like that. Now, going deeper than 1,000. So my channel sort of does a specialty around that early depth delve. In this league, I think I will go deep delve because why not? Definitely in PoE 2 when it comes out. But if you're looking for even like a big robust source around deep delve, then Connor Converse or One Mana Left, you can choose whichever name he goes by both. He did a really good video about deep delving about a year ago. And outside of that, there's also Steve, and obviously Steve streams on Twitch as well. And I'll put links to both of their channels as another two really good sources around Delve. There are obviously other creators around Delve, but these are the two that, you know, they really do specialize in that deep delve area. Now, things I don't recommend for Delve: evasion is horrifically bad. I've seen very few builds get into deep delve or anything like that that use evasion, and the reason for that is there are unevadable enemies like flicker spiders. And if you're doing things like Crystal King and things like that, there's sort of like this expectation you're going to take a bit of damage, and there's just too many limitations around evasion for me to be comfortable with ever recommending an evasion build in Delve. That being said, there are probably people out there that do play it, just not commonly. There was a thing called ZHP builds back in the day, when you could go like max dodge, and yeah, that was like phase acrobatics and whatnot when that was around. The thing is, like, those builds are long gone and the game just doesn't work like that. So that's just something to bear in mind. But yeah, anyway, those are some of the like sort of things you need to consider when you play Delve. Now, when you're going early Delve, I usually, and I'm going to do the video on this probably tomorrow now because I'm doing this video. But basically, early Delve, you can pretty much start, like, I usually start in about Act 8 in the campaign, and I sort of teeter in and out of Delve to get some early currency drops and gear drops and things like that. One of the other big advantages of Delve, I guess, is being able to get access to early maps from cities, and we'll talk about that in the actual Delve League Starter Guide that I'm going to put out in the next day. But beyond all of that, those are just some basic things to understand. The links to everything I've discussed here will be in the description below. But let's get into I think we're going to do 7 builds today, because, yeah. Now, 3 of the first builds will be builds that I've put together, League starters that I've put together, and there's also links to other variations of those builds that you can play throughout the campaign to be able to progress them. And the other benchmarks I'm going to provide links to videos and build guides that you can go to basically refer to how to play the build and things like that. One of which I've played myself, and so I'll provide the endgame links to that. But yeah, there's really good, there are League starters out there to play that, and I've referenced that as well. But anyway, these builds, you know, you can take down into, like, in the first, like, week to about 500 depth delve, and you can League start with them. They're just slower and variated depending on how you approach it. And obviously it depends on the resource. Now, for each of these that I've referenced, I've pulled the day 2 POB out of poe.ninja, and I've also pulled the week 1 POB, and all those links will be in the description, as well as a link to the original poe.ninja page as well for you to refer to the time machine on to see how they progress further, or you can refer to the video guides that are put in there too. Either way, entirely up to you. I'm not saying that these are definitive guides and this is every build that you can play in Delve either. These are just some ideas if you want to approach Delve earlier on. Arguably, you could get most builds to depth 300 at least to 350. Once you start getting to that 500 zone, that's when your build really gets tested for defenses and offense at the end of the day. And then up to 700, that's like to get past 500 and to take bosses down, you really need to be speccing into something that is a little bit more delve-centric at the end of the day. Anyway, let's get into the video and talk about these builds. Now, the first build is the Earthshatter Zerker. Now, I actually built this tree around some reference guide trees that I found on poe.ninja that it actually went into like 2,000 plus depth delve. The big thing here is running things like Defiance of Destiny, a lot of armor, things like that will actually get this build into Delve. Now, if you've got doubts about that, you could also switch the League Starter Guide, which I'll link below my League Starter Guide for this. You could also switch this into, you know, working with the Jug, for example, or the Chieftain as well for more added overcap defense for resistances and all those sorts of things. But early on, this build will sort of get you down there, and it will require a bit of tinkering to get it to work, but it can get very tanky, and it will work pretty well later on down the track. I think it did get up to quite high amounts of regeneration in the mid-tier tree, well over 1,000, and about 60,000 plus armor, all those things that you need in Delve, overcapped resistances, basically all the things that you will need. To get it further, you could endurance charge stack on it as well. You could do a number of things with this build to make it really, really tanky to get it down there. But yeah, it can go pretty far down to Delve. So if you've checked out my guide, if you look at the very last like Mage Blood tree, that's a deep Delve build as far as I've been able to benchmark and work with and get it tweaked to function. So yes, this build can take itself down pretty far into Delve. On average, like for the everyday general player, you're going to get to about 500 to 600 depth with it. Because it's got such high overlap damage with the actual Earthshatter explosions on the spikes, you're going to get a lot of damage on this build. So yeah, this build will actually work in Delve quite well, and I think it's setting out to be one of the main metas for this league as well, which is really good. It's not a new build by any measure. It's been around for a number of leagues, and it was quite popular last league as well, but it is quite a good build. I'd actually recommend, like, if you want to play it safer, you could switch to Jug. You take 40% damage drop and the rage drop, but overall you're still going to do a pretty good amount of damage once you start to gear it up, and you're going to be a hell of a lot tankier as well. And you could also add crit into the build instead of having, you know, absolute hit or whatnot, and that's going to give you a lot more like flexibility around scaling damage on the Juggernaut in particular. But this would be the first build that I would say would be worth trying to get into Delve and learning how to play. Now, the next one that I'm actually going to feature here is one that I have sort of worked with for now officially years, is the Shield Crush Jug. So, and basically Shield Crush from the very start is incredibly strong from Act 1. You can actually play it from Act 1 now. It got a huge buff when they took away the totems a few leagues ago, and they buffed up all numerical numbers on melee skills. So it is an absolution, one of the most ridiculous league starters that you can play out there that just goes underneath the radar. Now, the big thing here is I actually put together a pretty comprehensive league starter guide, which I've put down below, and that'll get you started. I've also got a full like endgame tree, I think from 2 leagues ago, I'll put a link down below for that as well. And basically how it works is you're scaling huge amounts of damage off of your shield at the end of the day, and then you use like global stats on your swords. So early on, you'll use like a prismatic eclipse, for example, which is, you put all green sockets in, and then you're going to do a lot of damage with that because that scales up your attack damage, or your attack speed, sorry. And then you're going to run like Emperor's Vigilance as soon as you can, and I think it's called Seething Fury, which is the jewel, which gives you a ton of crit. And my build variation plays on crit. Now, there are different ways to play this build, and I've put links to a Reddit thread below, which is a 65 million DPS Shield Crush DPS Slayer, which actually doesn't even use like the most insane. It uses pretty good gear out there. Like, it'd be expensive gear, but you could get like way better gear in the end game. But also the EHP on that would take it down and delve. Bert also put up a really good 3k Delver, or 2k plus the 3k Delver last league. Now that did use Mercs, but you could retool it off of Mercs and make it a hell of a lot better again. But I'll put a link to his video as well, and that's from 3.26. This build is very, very strong. And if you want something simple and easy that you can start from Act 1, you get Shield Crush throughout the campaign. And then you just use a combination of Shield Charge and Shield Crush, and you just basically nuke enemies. This is a pretty good build to go with. Now, I've always done like Replica Dream Feather, but you can do other versions without Replica Dream Feather as well. And the beauty of this league is things like Replica Dream Feather, or if you want to run it with like Paradoxica or something like that, if you could make that work with it, of course. These things are going to be a lot cheaper because Heist is going to be a lot more available theoretically at this stage, pending us knowing any other changes. So you can get access to a lot of stuff as well pretty early on. But the second build I definitely recommend would be Shield Crush Jug in this circumstance. Now, of recent leagues, one of my favorite builds to actually play has been Chaos Inoculation and Aegis Aurora on Lightning Tendrils. And the way that I usually do this is by running Incinerate. Now, you can actually run this setup with Incinerate into endgame. It just requires like switching to fire instead of lightning, and you still use the shock nose shaper of lightning, shaper of shock, whatever it's called. Anyway, basically, this build I usually take down to about 1000 depth delve each league. Now, the big disadvantage in the patch notes is obviously no longer we have Doriani stacking with Mercs, but we got a lot of other tools added into the game. So we've got the graphs, we've got the old ascendancies, and all the different things like that. And we do like big AoE with convergence in the very end, and we end up using, I think we use eccentricity last league, or no, escalating lightning tendrils, and that's incredibly big AoE and incredibly powerful and incredibly good for delving and mapping and pretty much everything else. So pretty much a few leagues ago I put an Incinerate League Starter Guide out there. And then you can either convert to lightning tendrils throughout. You can actually league start with that same setup with lightning tendrils because you get it at level 1 or act 1. Or you could just start with Incinerate. But ultimately, this build has served me for more than one league now. And the other thing you could also play on here, though, it's not preferable because it is quite limited, is Divine Eye will work on this setup as well. It's really just like the big goal is getting cluster jewels, getting an early Aegis Aurora. And I know I say that and people will be like, that's bait. It's not bait. I've done it for a number of leagues now. And basically then you just progress through the campaign and into early maps and blast through and delve and all the rest of it. And Bob's your uncle, you're done. But yeah, anyway, there's a league starter guide. Everything you need to know about how to convert it, all that stuff is all in the link in the description below. It is slightly out of date. I think I updated it for 3.26. It doesn't include any Merc Tech because it was before Merc Tech. So basically, yeah, that didn't get nerfed, and if anything, we're going to get buffed, or it's going to get buffed with the graph system as well being added and new mods and things like that. So what we can expect is pretty powerful build, or a reasonably powerful build. This will take you to about 500 to 600 depth if you do just Incinerate. If you take Lightning Tendrils with Mage Blood, I'm not too sure where it will go without the Doriani's Mercs, but it will still take you to about 600 depth, give or take, and I really had no issues face tanking Crystal Kings with this one. So yeah, this one is one that I have relied on more than once when I get stuck and I just want to play a spellcaster. Okay, so the next one that I'm going to feature here, we're actually going to benchmark this one off poe.ninja, is Molten Strike of Zenith. Now, I've actually pulled the trees here, so this is the week 1 tree, And obviously I've pulled the day 2 tree, and if you want to do the time machine on this, this will all be in the description below. The reason why I haven't listed any particular build here is because there are like a bajillion builds that run this. Now, the big thing here is obviously it requires very expensive gear, though a lot of people will league start it because it has this really high, where's my arms? It has this high ceiling that it gets to, which means you could go into billions of DPS, but it just takes a bit to get there. Now, the big thing to remember is it does require strength stacking. You will find Iron Fortress will probably still be expensive this league because not enough has changed in the game to make this weak. Crown of Eyes is quite cheap early on, and you may see things like Astra Mentis and things like that will be played early on this build. Definitely like Cogworks rings are going to be hopefully cheaper because Heist may make it more available, but it may not either. This is a very expensive ring, by the way. This is an extremely expensive ring as well. And these boots, Replica Alberons, is what basically makes this build tick. So basically you get 1 to 80 chaos damage to attacks per 80 strength. So the more strength you stack, you get more chaos damage, and then you scale that out based on strength. And things like Crown of the Eyes, which basically means increases and reductions to spell damage also apply to attacks at 150% of their value. And then you have a look on the tree. I think it has a node that does like in wherever it is. Where are you? Iron Will. So strength damage bonus applies to all spell skills, spell damage as well. So strength then stacks damage, and it sort of does this like double dip thing that increases spell damage, and then the increase to spell damage then spirals back with your Crown of Eyes, and that then synergizes with your the 150% over the top of your Replica Alberon's chaos damage, and then you're doing absolutely ballistic amounts of damage. You can league start this, and I would recommend just doing a Google search and having a look for a good guide for this one. There's a lot that tick around, and yeah, like as a league starter, I sort of like I got to put it on this list because obviously people go, why didn't you include Molten Striker Zenith? But do I recommend this for a new player? Absolutely not. This is a complicated build and a very expensive build, and you need to have a fair bit of game knowledge to be able to get it to work. I think it's a fantastic build. I just don't necessarily think it's a build designed for newer players or like, you know, more sort of when you don't have as much time sort of players. But still a fantastic build. But I'll leave you guys to hunt down some guides and stuff like that. If you want me to search for, I can append a few guides in here. I haven't done a lot of deep research into it, but if you do benchmark, you can basically just follow the tree for an experienced player. Basically, this one I've put the day 2 and the week 1 POB in, and there is an initial run with Sunder or Earthshatter or Sunder is how you basically get it up to gear, or how you get it to endgame. And you generally use like Chaos Primacy and things like that, and then you do a full respec at week 1. You'll see this changes to respec to the Juggernaut, sorry, and then basically you go from there. But yeah, this would be number 4 that I'd recommend because it is like this is a delve list, but I don't think this is the best league starter out there. I think this for delve is a very good league starter if you're willing to commit and put in the time, but your league start is going to be slower. That's, yeah, we'll leave it at that. Okay, so the next build I'm going to recommend here is Poisonous Concoction. Now, I know I said evasion not good, right, in Delve. However, this build excels exceptionally very early on. The reason why I sort of put this on the list is when I did some benchmarking, there was someone who got well above 500 within the first week of the league, last league, playing Poisonous Concoction. Now, they did change the build in the next week. That being said, this is a pretty good build. Now, before you say it, and I know that people in the comments will be like, this build is dead because it got some nerfs. It got a base damage nerf by a reasonable percentage, and it got the additional chaos damage increase. So, is it dead? Absolutely not. Was it OP to start with? Absolutely. Is it still going to be very strong? 100%. So, if you're about to type that, don't type it. I've addressed it. So anyway, getting into it, Anime Princess is a really good league starter video for this. And so I've put a link of that in the description. You can see his gameplay there. But as an overall, this build does allow you to get like high levels of endurance charges, which is exactly the POB that I'll put down below that was used in Delve last league in the day 2 and the week 2. It is very accessible, and Before you get bouncing, you just get normal poisonous concoction, then you just run lab a few times until you get bouncing. It's not all that difficult to get. With the nerf, likely people will run away from it like the hills, thinking that it's a dead skill, so it's going to be exceptionally cheap. It's still going to be very strong. And with that, like I've taken a build, I can't remember which league, but I actually played Poisonous Concoction a fair few leagues ago before Bouncing came out. So before the Trans Gems came out, they were the old gems. I played Poisonous Concoction in Delve, got it to about 400-500 with an armor base as well. And potentially you could sort of gear this into armor as well if you wanted to, though I don't know why you'd do that. You don't really need to. But as an overall, this build will do the job. And part of it is because you do so much damage with Poisonous Concoction that you can sort of farm down and delve pretty efficiently, rip through Crystal Kings and everything else in between. But I thought I'd feature this build. It does use a replica badge, the Brotherhood, which again, probably going to be a lot cheaper this league because that comes at a heist. And obviously people are going to be farming heist like mad lads because of all the changes in QOL. So I think that this is a reasonably accessible build at the end of the day. But anyway, this would be the next build that I would feature on this list. Okay, so the next one I wanted to feature is a Cast Wind Stun Chieftain. Now, people ask me about this. This is a very, very good Delve build, right? It's exceptionally good. It's very tanky. It's very consistent. You can push well below 1000 depth Delve. Some people will run Detonate Data Scavenging on it or Scavenger on it. I in particular ran like Firestorm on my variation of the build. But yeah, there is a really good League starter from Exile Cat from about a year ago, which is from 3.25, still applies to this day. You can League start the same way. If anything, I suspect this will be far more powerful because of number one, the graph system, and the alt ascendancies as well, because it basically means that you can save redundant points out of the chieftain that don't really apply, and you can get a lot more power into your build. So yeah, where I stand with this one is I think this one's definitely a contender. You can play it from League Start, though it does require a bit more of a nuanced setup. Again, you could go with 0 to hero build and just follow what Exile Cat's done. At the end of the day, very good build, and also has like 446,000 views, so a lot of people have played this build. It is a very good build, and his video is really good too. But anyway, there'll also be a POB that I'll put down below from players that were playing it in day 2 and week 1, the last league in Delve as well, because it's perfectly geared for Delve. Things I would say, and my guide, my in-game guide will also be up. Things I would also say about this is where it struggles is taking down things like Crystal King. So you do need like the Hateful Accuser ring to be able to do that. Early on, that's probably not going to be something you can get immediately in week 1. Though, you know, crazier things have happened. But that being said, this definitely a very good build. And definitely one that you could start from League Start. You could even get it working technically from an SSF standpoint. It does need a Valerium, and Valerium allows you to apply stun threshold. It is based on your energy shield, so you basically get constantly stunned. The two difficult things that you need to find will be Immutable Force and Blood Notch at the end of the day, and they are like necessary items you need for this build to work because you are going to be constantly getting stunned. But that being said, if you're playing Trade League, you should have no issues getting these early on, even if you get like really low rolls, and then you upgrade them over time. This is a very popular build though, very fun. Also fantastic for Ultimatum if you want to Ultimatum farm. And there's a ton of other mechanics you can play. And basically no button pressing, at least like later on. Early on, you're going to have to work for it. You could also gear this up playing Righteous Fire. So you could follow like Pox, for example, play Righteous Fire, and then gear into Cast Wind Stun later on when Righteous Fire's damage drops off. I didn't put Righteous Fire on this list, by the way, because everybody played Righteous Fire anyway. You can take it down reasonably low in Delve, but you're going to sort of struggle at that like lower depth level because your damage sort of drops off pretty hard unless you really invest in that hardcore. But yeah, anyway, this would be the next build that I feature on this list. Okay, so the final build I'm going to feature here is an Eviscerate Gladiator. Now, I've put a link down below to Garatha's build on this because I think he was one of the ones that championed this build when Eviscerate first came into the game in 3.25. The reason why this one actually got reasonably low, it definitely goes to like 500 to 600 depth. It's reasonably easy to gear. Now, the only question about this is whether or not you can still get the Surrender in the new Breach content. But in the absence of that, you could get a rare shield with like life recoup or something like that on it as well. Look, it gets a decent amount of life. Armor's okay, but Lucky Block is just undeniably fantastic. And now we basically run Eviscerate, and then you're just stacking a ton of damage and bleed, and then you just like roll through Delve and smash it up. Now the big thing here is like, aside from having a high DPS axe with a lot of bleed modifiers on it, it's relatively cheap to get started. So yeah, in the description below, I'll put a link to Garatha's video on how to league start this, because he's got a whole video which covers off on all the details that you'll need to be able to do that. But yeah, this would be another recommendation. And when I benchmarked in poe.ninja on week 1, this one sort of came up. There were a couple of Eviscerate builds. Not as common as other builds, because everybody was sort of going like lightning stacking, or like Doriani with Dorianis, or Molten Striker Zenith last league. The question you might ask, why am I not featuring like mana stackers in this? Because like early on, people don't do that. Like very early on, you have to gear up to get into that, and that'll be later in the game. Could you do it? Yeah, you could. It would still sort of work. But also, I'm not an expert on mana stacking. There's far better creators than me that can talk to that particular build. But yeah, these would be the ones that I put down. Like if you would just want to get to like that 300 to 500 depth range, all these builds listed here will be able to get you there. Okay, so I hope this video sort of scratches that itch for anyone who wanted to know what you could play in Delve. Now, I am working on a Perforate Jug, which I'm going to take down in a Delve, and I think I can get it quite low. Perforate is incredibly strong, and it just sort of slipped under the radar, I feel. But yeah, I'll do like a league start guide on that in due course over the next week. Obviously, I've had to push one day the Delve like video. We'll do that tomorrow night at this stage, and there's another few videos I want to work on in between then as well. And obviously an Atlas guide when PoE Planner comes up and all that sort of jazz. But anyway, if you like this video, don't forget to like and sub to the channel and all the rest of the stuff. And I will see you guys in the next one and on stream. Have a good one all.